Jack Thatcher's massive frame blocked the doorway as his confession sliced through the air. "I haven't touched a woman in 7 years." Eliza's heart pounded against her ribs as she faced the stranger she'd traveled 3,000 miles to marry. A man whose calloused hands could break her body but whose haunted eyes revealed a soul already broken. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning Eliza Montgomery stepped off the stagecoach in Timber Creek, Montana territory, the autumn wind nearly stole her bonnet right off her head. She clutched at the modest blue hat, securing it with trembling fingers while the driver tossed her single trunk to the ground with a thud that echoed her racing heart. 28 years old and 3,000 miles from the only home she'd ever known, Eliza stood alone on the dusty main street of a frontier town that barely deserved the name. "Mrs. Thatcher?" The station master approached, spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "I mean, soon-to-be Mrs. Thatcher." "Yes," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm Eliza Montgomery." The man smiled kindly. "Jack Thatcher sent word you'd be arriving today. Asked me to tell you he'll be along shortly." He glanced at the sky, where dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Storm's coming in. You're welcome to wait inside." "Thank you." Eliza followed him into the small station house, a simple wooden structure that served as post office, telegraph station, and general meeting place all at once. Inside, 3 men playing cards at a table fell silent as she entered, their curious gazes making her cheeks flush. A spinster schoolteacher from Boston had little experience with such open appraisal. The station master gestured to a bench. "Can I get you some coffee, miss? It ain't fancy, but it's hot." "That would be lovely," she said, settling her skirts as she sat. 6 weeks of travel had left her exhausted, her corset feeling like a cage around her ribs. The journey west had been arduous. Train as far as possible, then stagecoach through increasingly rugged territory until she reached this remote outpost. As she waited, Eliza mentally rehearsed what she knew about the man she had agreed to marry. Jack Thatcher, 36 years old, owner of a cattle ranch 10 miles outside town. Their correspondence had been brief but direct. He needed a wife to help manage his household. She needed a fresh start away from the pitying glances of those who knew her in Boston, where her fiancé had abandoned her at the altar 3 years prior. No promises of love, just practical partnership. Her fingers traced the edges of his last letter, folded in her pocket. His handwriting had been surprisingly neat for a rancher, his words economical, but not unkind. "I can offer you a solid roof, good food, and honest treatment. I don't drink to excess or raise my hand in anger. The work is hard, but the country is beautiful. I will respect your boundaries and expect you to respect mine." The door to the station house swung open with a bang, interrupting her thoughts. The men at the card table looked up, then quickly returned to their game, suddenly intent on their hands. Eliza followed their gaze and felt her breath catch. The man who filled the doorway stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to strain the seams of his worn canvas coat. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, dark brown streaked with premature silver. His eyes, a piercing blue that reminded her of winter ice on Boston Harbor, scanned the room until they found her. "Miss Montgomery." His voice was deep, roughened by weather and disuse. Not a question, but a statement. She rose to her feet, suddenly conscious of her travel-wrinkled dress and the loose strands of honey-brown hair that had escaped her careful bun. "Mr. Thatcher?" He nodded once, then crossed the room in 3 long strides. Up close, she could see the scars, one across his left cheekbone, another bisecting his right eyebrow, and the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against sun and wind. His hands, when he reached for her trunk, were massive, calloused from work, with knuckles that had been broken and healed more than once. "Storm's coming," he said, hefting her trunk onto one shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "We should get moving." Outside, he loaded her trunk into a wagon that had seen better days, then offered his hand to help her onto the seat. Even through her gloves, she could feel the strength in his grip, controlled and careful as he guided her up beside him. They left town in silence, the wagon rattling over the rutted trail that stretched before them. Eliza cast surreptitious glances at her soon-to-be husband, noting the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the tight line of his mouth partially hidden by his beard. He was nothing like the gentleman she had known in Boston, no polished manners or easy conversation, but there was something compelling about his quiet intensity. "You'll want to turn back after a week," he said suddenly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly a mile. "I beg your pardon?" "Most would." His eyes remained fixed on the trail ahead. "It's a hard life. Lonely. Town's far. Winters are brutal." Eliza smoothed her skirts, considering her response. "Mr. Thatcher, I didn't travel 3,000 miles on a whim. I understand what I'm agreeing to. Do you?" Now he did look at her, those ice-blue eyes seeming to see right through her carefully maintained composure. "This ain't Boston, Miss Montgomery. No tea parties or literary societies, just work and more work. I've been teaching 30 children of various ages in a single room for the past 10 years, Mr. Thatcher," she replied evenly. "I'm no stranger to hard work." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or reluctant respect. He turned his attention back to the trail, but his posture had softened slightly. The landscape around them was both beautiful and intimidating, rolling hills covered in tall grass that rippled like a golden sea in the wind, stands of pine trees clustering in the valleys, and beyond them, the jagged silhouette of mountains against the darkening sky. It was wilder than anything Eliza had ever seen, vast in a way that made her feel insignificant. "Your land?" she asked as they crossed a small creek, the water running clear and cold over smooth stones. "Started about a mile back," he replied. "Goes to those hills to the north, follows the creek east for another 3 miles. 800 acres, give or take." She tried to imagine it. 800 acres, when the school where she had taught sat on less than one. "It's beautiful." His hands tightened on the reins. "It's unforgiving. Beautiful don't feed you when the snow's 6 feet deep and the cattle are dying." The first fat drops of rain began to fall as a weathered 2-story cabin came into view, nestled against a hillside with a barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, suggesting warmth within despite the gathering storm. "Home?" Jack said, the words sounding rough, as if he rarely spoke it aloud. As they pulled up to the house, the door opened and an elderly man emerged, his leathery face creasing into a smile. "About time you got back," he called. "Was beginning to think you'd changed your mind." "Hank Williams," Jack said to Eliza by way of introduction. "Works the ranch with me. Hank, this is Miss Montgomery." "Ma'am?" Hank tipped his hat respectfully. "Pleasure to meet you. Been telling Jack for years he needs a woman's touch around here." The rain was falling steadily now, drumming on the wagon's canvas cover. Jack helped her down with the same careful strength he'd shown earlier, then reached for her trunk. "Get settled inside," he said. "We'll talk after supper." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly well appointed, clean and orderly, with solid furniture that spoke of careful craftsmanship. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with comfortable chairs drawn up before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that made Eliza's heart lift with unexpected pleasure. "Your room's upstairs," Jack said, carrying her trunk ahead of her. "End of the hall." The bedroom was simple but pleasant, with a handmade quilt on the bed and curtains at the windows that softened the utilitarian space. A basin and pitcher sat on a small table beneath a mirror, and a wardrobe stood against one wall, its doors open to reveal empty shelves waiting for her belongings. "It's lovely," she said, meaning it. Jack set her trunk down and lingered awkwardly in the doorway. "Supper's at 6. I'll leave you to get settled." He turned to go, then paused. "Miss Montgomery?" "Yes?" "I want you to understand something." His voice had dropped lower, almost gentle despite its roughness. "This marriage, it's practical for both of us. I need help with the house, someone to make it a proper home. You need security, a fresh start. But I don't expect—" He stopped, searching for words. "What I mean to say is, there are no obligations beyond what's written in our agreement." Before she could respond, he was gone, his heavy footsteps retreating down the stairs. Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind spinning with the reality of what she had done. She had traveled across a continent to marry a stranger, a massive, scarred, taciturn man who lived in isolation in this beautiful, dangerous wilderness. Yet something about Jack Thatcher intrigued her. Beneath his gruff exterior, she had glimpsed moments of consideration, the careful way he had helped her into the wagon, the books that lined his shelves, the clean, well-ordered home he had prepared for her arrival. Outside, the storm broke in earnest, rain lashing against the windows as thunder rolled across the valley. Eliza began to unpack her meager belongings, wondering what secrets lay behind her future husband's guarded blue eyes, and what had made him seek a bride from 3,000 miles away rather than from the surrounding towns. Whatever his reasons, she was here now. For better or worse, this remote cabin would be her home, and this enigmatic rancher would be her husband. The life she had known was behind her, and an unknown future stretched ahead, as vast and unpredictable as the Montana wilderness. Supper that first night was a quiet affair. Jack had prepared a simple but hearty stew, the table set with mismatched dishes that had clearly seen years of use. Hank carried most of the conversation, sharing stories of the ranch and town that Eliza suspected were carefully curated to avoid anything too personal about her future husband. "Been a good year for calves," Hank said, breaking a piece of cornbread. "Should fetch fair prices come spring drive." Jack merely nodded, his attention seemingly focused on his bowl, though Eliza noticed his eyes occasionally flicking toward her when he thought she wasn't looking. "The house is lovely," she offered, attempting to bridge the silence. "Did you build it yourself?" "My father built the original cabin," Jack replied after a moment. "I added the second story and the east wing 5 years back." "Jack's got a gift with woodworking," Hank added. "Made every stick of furniture you see. That bookshelf in the parlor took him all winter 2 years ago." A faint color rose above Jack's beard. "It passed the time," he said gruffly. After the meal, Hank excused himself to check on a mare about to foal, leaving Eliza alone with Jack. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably until he cleared his throat. "We should discuss arrangements," he said, rising to pour coffee into 2 cups. "Preacher comes through town every 3rd Sunday. We can be married then." "That's in 4 days," Eliza noted, accepting the coffee he offered. Jack nodded. "If that suits you, gives you time to change your mind if you're having second thoughts." "I'm not," she said firmly, though her stomach fluttered with nervousness. "Are you?" His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "No." He settled back into his chair, cradling his cup in those massive hands. "After we're married, this house is as much yours as mine. You'll have full say in its running. I keep ledgers for the ranch accounts. They're in the desk in the study. You're welcome to look them over." "Thank you," Eliza said, surprised by his openness about finances. Even in Boston, such matters were rarely discussed so directly with women. "As for sleeping arrangements," he continued, his voice carefully neutral, Your room is yours alone. I sleep downstairs in the study most nights anyway. She felt heat rise to her cheeks but appreciated his directness. I understand. I rise before dawn, he said, out working until midday most days, then back again until sundown, longer in summer. Hank lives in the small cabin by the barn. Mrs. Reynolds from town comes once a week to help with laundry. I'm capable of handling household tasks, Eliza said. I may have been a school teacher, but I wasn't raised to be idle. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Never thought you were. He rose suddenly, moving to a small cabinet in the corner. There's something else. He returned with a worn leather-bound book. Marriage contract. Sets out what we're agreeing to. I'd like you to read it. Make any changes you think necessary. Eliza took the book, surprised to find not a formal legal document, but a handwritten journal. Inside, in the same neat script she recognized from his letters, Jack had outlined their arrangement, her duties in managing the household, his responsibilities in providing for her material needs, provisions for her financial security, should anything happen to him. This is thorough, she said, turning the pages. Want things clear between us, he replied. No misunderstandings later. She read a passage aloud. The wife shall have full authority over household matters and may order supplies and engage services as needed without consulting the husband, provided such expenses are recorded in the household ledger. She looked up at him. This is unusually generous, Jack shrugged. Makes sense. You'll know what's needed better than I will. As she continued reading, one section caught her attention. In matters of marital relations, both parties maintain the right to accept or decline physical intimacy without prejudice or consequence. Her face flushed again, but she appreciated the clarity. The contract acknowledged the possibility of a physical relationship while granting both of them autonomy. As I said, Jack noted, seeing where her eyes had fallen, no obligations beyond what we agree to. It's very fair, she said, closing the book. I'd like to review it more thoroughly, but I don't anticipate wanting changes. He nodded, seemingly relieved. Take your time. That night, as Eliza prepared for bed in her new room, the sound of the storm still raging outside, she contemplated the man she would soon marry. Jack Thatcher was nothing like she had imagined, yet in some ways exactly what his letters had promised. Direct, honest, fair. The hints of gentleness beneath his rough exterior intrigued her, making her wonder what experiences had shaped him. Morning came with clearing skies and the sounds of activity below. Eliza dressed quickly, pinning her hair in a simple bun before making her way downstairs. She found Jack by the fireplace, pulling on heavy boots. There's coffee, he said by way of greeting. Biscuits in the warming oven. Thank you. She moved toward the kitchen, then paused. Is there anything specific you'd like me to attend to today? His eyes lingered on her for a moment. Make yourself at home. Get familiar with things. Ranch doesn't run itself, but the house has been standing a long time without a woman's touch. Won't fall down if you take a day to settle in. After he left, Eliza explored the house more thoroughly. The kitchen was well equipped, but desperately in need of organization. The pantry was stocked with basics, flour, sugar, coffee, preserved foods, but lacked the herbs and spices she was accustomed to using. The parlor contained the magnificent bookcase Hank had mentioned, filled with an eclectic collection, practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry, histories of the West, and to her surprise, volumes of poetry and classic literature. She ran her fingers along the spines, pausing at a well-worn copy of Wordsworth. Opening it, she found passages carefully underlined, the margins filled with neat annotations in Jack's handwriting. The discovery both surprised and moved her. This taciturn rancher, spending winter evenings engaged with poetry, finding meaning in words that spoke of beauty and contemplation. The study revealed more of the man she was to marry. Meticulously kept ledgers showed years of careful management, each entry precise and detailed. A locked gun cabinet held several rifles and a revolver, all well maintained. On the desk sat a single framed photograph, a somber family portrait showing a stern-faced man, a gentle-looking woman, and a boy of perhaps 12, who bore a striking resemblance to Jack. When she opened a drawer looking for paper, she found a stack of letters tied with string. She hesitated, then closed the drawer without examining them, respecting his privacy despite her curiosity. By midday, Eliza had cleaned the kitchen to her satisfaction and was planning a more comprehensive inventory of household supplies when Jack returned, his clothes damp with sweat despite the autumn chill. "Found everything you need?" he asked, washing his hands at the pump by the sink. "Mostly," she replied. "Though I'd like to make a list for town if that's possible." He nodded. "I'll be going in tomorrow for supplies. You're welcome to come along." They ate a simple lunch of bread and cold meat, their conversation tentative but less strained than the previous evening. Jack asked about her journey west, listening attentively as she described the changing landscapes and challenges of travel. "Why did you leave Boston?" he asked suddenly. "Your letters mentioned needing a fresh start, but not why." Eliza set down her cup, weighing how much to share. "I was engaged," she said finally, "to the son of a prominent family. 3 years ago, he left me waiting at the church. Afterward, I found he'd been secretly engaged to another woman with a larger dowry." Jack's expression darkened. "Man like that doesn't deserve the title." "Perhaps not," she agreed. "But the experience taught me valuable lessons about practical arrangements versus romantic notions." His eyes studied her face. "That why you answered my advertisement, practical arrangement?" "Yes," she admitted, "though I'll confess your letters suggested a man of integrity, which was equally important to me." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Integrity," he repeated quietly. "Been called many things in my life. Don't recall that being one of them." Before she could respond, he rose from the table. "Need to check the north pasture before dark. We lost some fencing in the storm." As he reached the door, he turned back. "Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sounded different in his deep voice. "Thank you for being direct about your reasons. Honesty matters out here more than pretty words." With that, he was gone, leaving Eliza to contemplate the strange feeling that had bloomed in her chest at the sound of her name on his lips. This marriage might be founded on practicality, but she was beginning to suspect that living with Jack Thatcher would be anything but simple. The journey to Timber Creek the following day revealed aspects of Jack that Eliza hadn't yet witnessed. He helped her into the wagon with the same careful strength he'd shown before, but as they approached town, his posture gradually stiffened, his jaw tightening beneath his beard. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Don't much care for town," he replied, his voice even more clipped than usual. Eliza soon understood why. As they pulled up to the general store, conversations halted. Mothers drew children closer. Men nodded stiffly, their greetings polite but distant. Jack seemed to occupy more space in town than he did on his ranch, his massive frame and intense expression creating an invisible barrier that few dared cross. "Mrs. Thatcher to be," the shopkeeper greeted, his smile genuine but eyes curious as they darted between her and Jack. "What can I help you with today?" While Eliza selected household supplies, she couldn't help noticing the whispers that followed them. Once, catching fragments of conversation, 7 years since, she glanced toward Jack. His face betrayed nothing, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the counter. They were loading their purchases when a young woman approached, her expensive dress and carefully arranged blonde curls marking her as someone of standing in the small community. Mr. Thatcher, she said, her voice carrying a deliberately sweet tone, what a surprise to see you in town twice in 1 week. Jack nodded curtly. Miss Harrington, and this must be your arrangement. Her eyes swept over Eliza with barely concealed disdain. This is Miss Montgomery, Jack replied, his voice deceptively calm. My fiancée. How progressive of you to marry a schoolteacher. Miss Harrington smiled thinly. Though I suppose beggars can't be choosers, can they? Eliza felt Jack tense beside her, but before he could respond, she stepped forward. Miss Harrington, I presume, she said pleasantly. How fortunate to meet you. Mr. Thatcher mentioned there was a finishing school graduate in town. I do so admire women who dedicate themselves to ornamental accomplishments when they lack the intellect for anything substantive. Miss Harrington's face flushed an unflattering shade of red. Well, I never... If you'll excuse us, Eliza continued smoothly. We have several more errands before returning home. As they walked away, she felt Jack's eyes on her. That was Catherine Harrington, he said quietly. Her father owns the bank and half the businesses in town. I gathered she was someone accustomed to deference, Eliza replied. Was I wrong to speak as I did? To her surprise, a deep chuckle rumbled from Jack's chest the first time she'd heard him laugh. Wrong? No. Might make things complicated, but... He shook his head, something like admiration in his eyes. Didn't expect you to have claws, Boston. The nickname, spoken with unexpected warmth, sent a flutter through her chest. Their final stop was the preacher's house, a modest dwelling attached to the small church. Reverend Clark welcomed them into his study, a cramped room lined with theological texts. I received your letter, Mr. Thatcher, he said, examining Eliza with kind but assessing eyes. You wish to be married this Sunday? Yes, Jack confirmed. Miss Montgomery arrived from Boston 2 days ago. The preacher's brows rose slightly. I see. And you're both certain about this arrangement? We are, Eliza said firmly. Miss Montgomery, the Reverend said gently, would you mind if I spoke with Mr. Thatcher alone for a moment? Curiosity piqued, Eliza stepped outside, catching only the Reverend's first words. Jack, considering what happened with Sarah. The door closed, leaving her wondering who Sarah might be. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Jack seemingly lost in thought. As they crested a hill overlooking the valley, he pulled the wagon to a stop. There's something you should know, he said, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains, about why folks in town look at me the way they do. Eliza waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to share. 7 years ago, I was engaged to Sarah Harrington, Catherine's sister. His voice was flat, as if reciting facts from a ledger. Her father approved the match. I was doing well, had prospects. 2 days before the wedding, she ran off with a gambler passing through town. I'm sorry, Eliza said softly. Jack shrugged, the gesture at odds with the tension in his frame. Found out later she'd been seeing him for months, laughing at me behind my back, the big dumb rancher who thought a society girl would settle for him. What happened after she left? I kept to myself, built the ranch, let them talk. His hands tightened on the reins. Town split into 2 camps, those who pitied me and those who thought I'd done something to drive her away. Neither was bearable, so I stopped going except when necessary. And you haven't? Eliza hesitated, uncertain how to phrase her question. Haven't touched a woman since, he finished bluntly. Wasn't interested in giving this town more to gossip about. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Eliza understood now why he'd sought a bride from so far away, someone untouched by local prejudices and whispers. Thank you for telling me, she said. It can't have been easy. He gave her a sidelong glance. Figured you deserve to know what you're walking into. Sunday, those same people will be watching, wondering if you'll run too. I won't, she said simply. His eyes searched her face. You sound certain. I am. She met his gaze steadily. We may have different reasons for entering this marriage, Mr. Thatcher, but I don't make promises lightly. Something shifted in his expression, a subtle easing of the guardedness she'd grown accustomed to seeing. Without another word, he flicked the reins and they continued toward home. That evening, as Eliza organized her new supplies in the kitchen, she found Jack in the doorway, watching her. What Miss Harrington said, he began awkwardly. About beggars and choosers. I want you to know that's not how I see this. I didn't seek a bride from Boston because I couldn't find one here. Eliza paused in her work. Why did you then? He considered his answer carefully. Wanted someone who'd see me without 17 years of stories clouding their vision. Someone who might judge me on who I am now, not who they think I was or should be. The vulnerability in his admission touched her. That seems reasonable. Also, he added, a hint of that earlier warmth returning to his voice. Wanted someone with enough spine to stand up to the Catherines of this world. Seems I chose well there. The compliment brought a flush to her cheeks. She was unnecessarily rude. She was, he agreed, but most would have smiled and endured it. You didn't. I spent 10 years maintaining order among children who thought they could intimidate me because I'm small, Eliza replied. I learned early that allowing disrespect only invites more of the same. Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. Same principle applies to breaking horses. Establish boundaries early, enforce them consistently. Did you just compare me to a horse trainer? Eliza asked, surprised into a laugh. The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Meant it as a compliment. Oddly enough, I took it as one. She returned to arranging jars on the shelf, aware of his continued presence. Was there something else? He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming too large for the doorframe. About Sunday. After the ceremony, folks will expect a celebration. Nothing fancy, just food and such at the hotel. We don't have to if you'd rather not. Do you want to? She asked. Doesn't matter to me, he said, but something in his tone suggested otherwise. Eliza turned to face him fully. I think it does matter. This is your community, despite the complications. If you want to celebrate our marriage publicly, I'm willing. He studied her for a long moment. I'd like to do things properly, he said finally. Not hide away like we're ashamed. Then we'll celebrate, she said simply. After he left, Eliza found herself smiling as she continued her work. Jack Thatcher remained a mystery in many ways, but with each revelation, each small vulnerability shared, she found herself increasingly intrigued by the man she would soon call husband. Sunday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Perfect weather for a wedding, though Eliza tried not to read too much meaning into this coincidence. She dressed carefully in the one good gown she had brought from Boston, a deep blue silk that complemented her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her hair, arranging it in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. A soft knock at her door startled her. Miss Montgomery? Jack's deep voice was muffled through the wood. There's something for you downstairs when you're ready. Curious, she finished her preparations and made her way down to find a small wooden box on the kitchen table. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a simple silver locket on a delicate chain. It was my mother's, Jack said from the doorway, his massive frame somehow looking less imposing in his Sunday best. Clean black trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a dark jacket that strained slightly across his broad shoulders. He'd trimmed his beard, revealing more of the strong jawline beneath, and his usually windswept hair was neatly combed. "It's beautiful," Eliza said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Are you certain you want me to have it?" He nodded, moving closer. "She always said it should go to my wife. Wouldn't be right to keep it in a drawer." The word wife hung in the air between them, a reminder of the commitment they would make in just a few hours. "Would you help me put it on?" she asked. Jack hesitated, then stepped behind her. His fingers, so large they dwarfed the delicate clasp, worked with surprising dexterity as he fastened the necklace. Eliza was acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap, the warmth radiating from his body, the careful way he kept from touching her skin as he arranged the chain. "Thank you," she said when he finished, turning to face him. "It means a great deal to me." His eyes, that striking blue that still startled her when they met hers directly, studied her face. "You look nice," he said, the words coming out rough, as if unused to giving compliments. "The color suits you." "Thank you," she replied, surprised by how much the simple praise pleased her. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Thatcher." Something that might have been embarrassment crossed his features before he cleared his throat. "We should get going. Reverend Clark doesn't appreciate tardiness." The small church was more crowded than Eliza had expected. It seemed most of the town had turned out, curiosity overcoming whatever reservations they might have about Jack Thatcher and his mail-order bride. She felt their eyes following her as she walked down the short aisle to where Jack waited beside the Reverend, his posture rigid, his expression guarded. The ceremony was brief but dignified, the traditional vows spoken clearly by both. When Jack slid a simple gold band onto her finger, another surprise as they hadn't discussed rings, his hands were steady, though Eliza noticed a muscle working in his jaw. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Clark intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Thatcher, you may kiss your bride." A flicker of panic crossed Jack's face, so brief Eliza thought she might have imagined it. Clearly they hadn't discussed this part of the ceremony. Before she could react, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle, almost tentative, and over so quickly she barely had time to register the scratchy softness of his beard against her skin. The gathering at the hotel afterward was less awkward than Eliza had feared. The citizens of Timber Creek, whatever their opinions about Jack, extended polite congratulations and seemed genuinely welcoming to her. Even Catherine Harrington maintained a civil demeanor, though her eyes followed Jack with an expression Eliza couldn't quite decipher. Mrs. Thatcher, Dr. Wilson, the town physician, approached with his wife. "We're delighted to welcome you to our community. I hope you'll consider joining my wife's ladies' auxiliary. They meet every Tuesday." "That's very kind," Eliza replied. "I'd be pleased to attend once we're settled." "Excellent," Mrs. Wilson beamed. "It'll be refreshing to have someone with your educational background. We've been discussing starting a proper library for the town." As the conversation continued, Eliza noticed Jack standing slightly apart, nursing a glass of whiskey, and watching the proceedings with the air of a man enduring rather than enjoying himself. When an elderly rancher engaged him in conversation, however, his posture relaxed marginally. "Your husband isn't one for social gatherings," Mrs. Wilson observed, following Eliza's gaze. "We were surprised when he agreed to this celebration." "He wanted to do things properly," Eliza said, echoing Jack's words from days earlier. "That sounds like Jack," the doctor's wife nodded approvingly. "Despite what some might say, he's always been a man of principle." The afternoon wore on, and Eliza found herself increasingly aware of Jack's discomfort. When she caught his eye across the room, she tilted her head slightly toward the door, silently asking if he was ready to leave. The relief in his expression was answer enough. They said their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations before stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight. Jack helped her into the wagon with the same careful courtesy he'd shown from the beginning. Though something had changed, a new awareness between them perhaps, or simply the weight of the vows they'd exchanged. "Thank you," he said as they left town behind, for understanding it was time to go. "You look like a man contemplating gnawing off his own leg to escape a trap," she replied with a small smile. His surprised laugh was fuller than before, a deep, genuine sound that transformed his face. "That obvious, was it?" "Only to someone paying attention," she assured him. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the landscape golden in the setting sun. Eliza found herself thinking about the day, not just the ceremony or celebration, but the small moments. Jack's unexpected gift, the gentle way he'd kissed her, the relief in his eyes when she'd understood his need to leave. "Jack," she said, testing his given name aloud for the first time. "I've been wondering about something." He glanced at her, a brow raised in question. "Why did you choose me? You must have received responses from other women." He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "There were 3 others. One wanted guarantees about town social life I couldn't provide. Another asked for financial support for family back east. The third—" He hesitated. Her letter felt wrong. Too eager to please, promising things no honest woman would offer a stranger. "And mine?" Eliza prompted when he fell silent again. "Yours was straightforward, practical. You asked the right questions about the ranch, the work, what kind of life you'd be living, mentioned your experience teaching, how it prepared you for hard work and isolation." His hands adjusted on the reins. "And there was something else, a dignity in your words. No false promises or desperate pleas, just one honest person speaking to another." The assessment warmed her. "I appreciate your candor." As they approached the ranch, Eliza felt a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation. This place was truly her home now, and the man beside her was her husband, not just in name, but in law and commitment. Hank was waiting when they arrived, his weathered face splitting into a broad grin. "About time you two got back. Congratulations, Mrs. Thatcher." He helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by producing a small posy of wildflowers. "Not much, but thought you might like something pretty for your first day as a married lady." "They're lovely," Eliza said, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Hank." Jack disappeared to tend to the horses while Hank escorted her inside, where she discovered another surprise. The main room had been transformed with fresh curtains at the windows, a tablecloth she hadn't seen before, and a small vase of flowers on the table set for supper. "Did all this while you were gone," Hank explained. "Thought you might appreciate something special. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a bottle of good whiskey and a mind to give you newlyweds some privacy." Alone in the house, her house now, she reminded herself, Eliza moved to the window, watching as Jack emerged from the barn. In the golden evening light, with his broad shoulders and purposeful stride, he cut an imposing figure. Yet she was beginning to see beyond that exterior to the thoughtful, principled man beneath. When he entered, their eyes met across the room, and a moment of awareness passed between them. The recognition that everything had changed, even if the practical details of their arrangement remained the same. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thatcher," he said quietly. And despite all her rational understanding of their practical arrangement, Eliza found herself wanting for the first time to cross the careful distance they had maintained and discover whether a second kiss might reveal more than the first. The days following the wedding settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and strange. Jack continued his work on the ranch, rising before dawn and returning for the midday meal. Eliza established her own routines, managing the household, organizing supplies, planning improvements to the kitchen garden that had fallen into neglect. On the surface, little had changed. Jack still slept in the study, maintaining the respectful distance they had agreed upon. Their conversations remained largely practical, discussions of ranch business, household needs, plans for the coming winter. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, subtle shifts were occurring. Jack lingered longer at meals, occasionally sharing stories about the ranch's early days or asking questions about her life in Boston. Eliza found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. The careful precision of his movements despite his size, the gentleness he showed with injured animals, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners on the rare occasions he smiled. A week after the wedding, Eliza was hanging freshly washed curtains when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Through the window, she saw Jack riding hard toward the house, another rider following close behind. Something in their urgency sent her hurrying to the door. "Wildfire in the North Valley," Jack called as he dismounted. "Need every hand. Hank's gathering men from the neighboring ranches." The second rider, a young ranch hand she hadn't met before, was already turning his horse. "I'll head to the Peterson place," he shouted before galloping away. Jack strode into the house, reaching for the rifle above the door. "Might be gone overnight. Don't wait up." "Is there anything I can do?" Eliza asked, following him as he gathered ammunition and a canteen. He paused, seeming to truly see her for the first time since arriving. "Pack food. Whatever can travel. We'll have hungry men fighting that fire." While Jack hitched the wagon, Eliza worked quickly, wrapping bread, cheese, and cold meat in cloths, filling jars with water, and packing it all into baskets. As she worked, she noticed the marriage contract on Jack's desk, open to a page she hadn't seen before. "In times of emergency, both parties shall set aside personal considerations for the welfare of the ranch and its people." The practical words struck her as unexpectedly touching, a reminder that their marriage, however unconventional, was founded on shared responsibility and mutual support. When she brought the food outside, Jack was securing extra blankets in the wagon. "Good thinking," she said, nodding toward them. "Nights get cold in the valley." He took the baskets from her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Thank you for this." "Be careful," she said, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. His eyes met hers, something unreadable flickering in their blue depths. "Always am." As the wagon disappeared down the road, Eliza was struck by a sensation she hadn't anticipated, the peculiar emptiness of the house without Jack's presence. Even when he was working outside, she'd grown accustomed to the knowledge that he would return, his quiet strength a constant she hadn't realized she'd come to rely on. Night fell, and with it came wind that rattled the windows and carried the distant smell of smoke. Unable to sleep, Eliza sat by the window in the main room, watching the horizon where an ominous orange glow marked the wildfire's location. It was past midnight when exhaustion finally drove her to bed, though her sleep was fitful, punctuated by dreams of flames and Jack standing alone against them. Morning brought no wagon, no word. Eliza kept herself busy with chores, trying to ignore the knot of worry tightening in her stomach. By mid-afternoon, her concern had grown to the point that she saddled the gentle mare Jack had designated as hers and rode to the ridge overlooking the North Valley. The sight that greeted her was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. A vast swath of grassland had been blackened, though the fire appeared contained now, burning itself out against a freshly dug firebreak. Tiny figures moved along this line, keeping watch and dousing any flames that threatened to jump the barrier. Relief washed over her when she spotted the wagon near a makeshift camp at the edge of the firebreak. Urging the mare forward, she made her way down the slope. The camp was a scene of organized exhaustion. Men lay sleeping wherever they could find space, faces blackened with soot, clothes singed and dirty. Others stood watch by the fire line, passing canteens and taking turns resting. She found Jack conferring with Hank and another rancher, his expression grim. His shirt was torn, a nasty burn visible on his forearm, his face streaked with ash and sweat. Eliza? He straightened when he saw her, surprise and something like concern crossing his features. "What are you doing here?" "I brought more food and clean water," she said, dismounting, "and bandages. I thought they might be needed." Hank grinned despite his obvious exhaustion. "Bless you, Mrs. Thatcher, these boys have been working since yesterday without proper tending." While the men gratefully accepted the fresh supplies, Eliza set up an impromptu medical station, cleaning and bandaging burns and cuts. Jack watched her work, his expression softening as she efficiently tended to his men. "You're good at this," he said when she finally approached to examine his arm. 10 years of school children," she reminded him, gently cleaning the burn. "I've dealt with every injury imaginable." He winced slightly as she applied salve. "Didn't expect you to ride out here. Would you have preferred I stayed at home, worrying uselessly?" Her fingers were gentle despite the challenge in her words. "No," he admitted, watching her wrap clean linen around his arm. "Though I don't like thinking of you riding alone. I'm not made of porcelain, Jack." She secured the bandage with a neat knot. "I may be from Boston, but I'm perfectly capable of riding a few miles to help my husband." His eyes caught hers at the word husband, something warm kindling in their depths. "No," he said quietly. "You're definitely not made of porcelain." By evening, the fire was fully contained, though men would remain overnight to ensure no embers reignited. Jack insisted Eliza return to the ranch before dark, but to her surprise, he handed the wagon reins to a young ranch hand. "Tom will drive you back," he said. "I'll ride alongside." The journey home was quiet, both of them too exhausted for conversation. When they reached the ranch, Jack helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with fatigue, "for coming today. It meant something to the men." "And to you?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. In the fading light, his expression was difficult to read. "Yes," he said finally, "to me most of all." Later, after Jack had bathed and changed, Eliza found him at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee as if it might contain answers to questions he hadn't asked. "Your arm should be redressed," she said, setting fresh bandages beside him. He nodded, rolling up his sleeve to reveal the angry red burn. As she tended to it, she was acutely aware of his eyes following her movements, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers, of how easily her hands were dwarfed by his forearm. "You could have been killed," she said softly, securing the fresh bandage. "Fire's part of ranch life," he replied. "Can't run from it." "No," she agreed, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm beginning to understand that facing danger is easier when you're not alone." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability he rarely allowed to surface. "Been alone a long time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Almost forgot what it was like to have someone waiting." The admission hung between them, honest and unguarded, in a way their interactions rarely were. In that moment, Eliza realized that despite the practical nature of their arrangement, despite the careful boundaries they maintained, something deeper was taking root, something neither of them had anticipated when they signed their marriage contract. "Well," she said, her hand still resting lightly on his arm, "you're not alone anymore." His larger hand covered hers, calloused and warm. "No," he agreed, "I suppose I'm not." Autumn deepened around the Thatcher ranch, painting the surrounding hills in russet and gold. The wildfire had claimed nearly 200 acres of grazing land, but thanks to the quick response, no homes or livestock had been lost. Jack threw himself into recovery efforts, working from dawn until dusk to prepare for winter, now just weeks away. Eliza settled into her role with increasing confidence. She'd established a weekly routine for household tasks, befriended Mrs. Reynolds, who came to help with laundry, and even begun riding out to check on the nearer pastures when Jack was occupied elsewhere. The practical arrangement they had agreed upon was working well, each of them fulfilling their responsibilities while maintaining a respectful companionship. Yet beneath this comfortable routine, something was changing. The careful distance Jack had maintained began to soften. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, sat with her in the evenings while she read aloud from his favorite books, sought her opinion on ranch matters beyond the household. For her part, Eliza found herself watching for his return each day, taking pleasure in the rare moments his serious face relaxed into a smile, wondering about the man beneath the layers of reserve and caution. A month after their wedding, Eliza rode into town for the ladies' auxiliary meeting. Mrs. Wilson had been persistent in her invitations, and Jack had encouraged her to go, recognizing her need for female companionship. The meeting was held in the church hall. A dozen women gathered around tables laden with needlework and refreshments. They welcomed Eliza warmly, clearly curious about the woman who had married the reclusive Jack Thatcher. "How are you settling in, Mrs. Thatcher?" Mrs. Peterson, a rancher's wife with kind eyes and work-roughened hands, asked as they sorted donated books for the proposed town library. "Very well, thank you," Eliza replied. "The ranch is beautiful, and there's always something that needs attention." "And Jack?" Mrs. Wilson inquired, her tone carefully casual. "Is he treating you well?" "He's a good man," Eliza said simply, surprised by how naturally the defense came to her lips. "Hard-working, honest, considerate." The women exchanged glances. "We're glad to hear it," Mrs. Peterson said. "Jack's had a difficult time. Sarah Harrington's betrayal was just the last in a series of losses." Eliza's hand stilled on the book she was examining. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Wilson hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You don't know? About his family?" "He mentioned his father built the original cabin," Eliza offered, suddenly aware of how little Jack had shared about his past. "His parents died in the influenza outbreak 12 years ago," Mrs. Peterson said gently. "Jack was just 24, left to run the ranch and raise his younger brother alone." This was entirely new information. Jack had never mentioned a brother, and Eliza had assumed from the family photograph that his parents had passed away when he was much younger. "His brother, Michael, was 16 when they lost their parents," Mrs. Wilson continued. "Wild boy, always in some kind of trouble. Jack did his best, but 2 years later, Michael ran off with a traveling show. They found his body 6 months after that in a mining camp near Helena, shot in a card game." Eliza felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "Jack never told me." "He wouldn't," Mrs. Peterson sighed, blamed himself for not keeping Michael in line. Then, just when he seemed to be moving forward, Sarah broke his heart and humiliated him publicly. No wonder he keeps to himself. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Eliza remained distracted, piecing together a new understanding of the man she had married. The gruff exterior, the careful distance he maintained, his reluctance to engage with the town, all took on new meaning in light of these revelations. When she returned to the ranch that afternoon, she found Jack splitting wood in the yard, his powerful arms bringing the axe down in rhythmic strokes that sent pieces flying. Watching him work, shirt darkened with sweat despite the autumn chill, she was struck by the solitary figure he cut against the landscape, a man who had shouldered his burdens alone for too long. He paused when he noticed her, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "How was town?" "Informative," she replied, dismounting. Something in her tone made him study her face more carefully. "Sounds like you heard some stories. Why didn't you tell me about your brother?" The question emerged more directly than she had intended. Jack's expression shuddered, the openness of recent days vanishing behind a wall of reserve. Didn't see the need to burden you with old grief. It's not a burden to know my husband's history, Eliza said gently, especially losses that shaped him. He set the axe down with deliberate care, his movements controlled. What exactly did they tell you? Eliza related what she had learned, watching as his jaw tightened with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. They left out the part where I'm the one who drove him away, he said finally, his voice flat. Tried to keep him in line, make him responsible. All he wanted was freedom. Our last conversation was a shouting match. He left that night, never said goodbye. The raw pain in his voice made Eliza ache for him. You were young yourself, suddenly responsible for a ranch and a teenage boy. Doesn't change the fact that he died alone, far from home. Jack picked up the axe again, but instead of resuming his work, he simply held it, the tool dwarfed by his hands. I failed him, just like I failed Sarah. Sarah made her own choice, Eliza reminded him. Just as Michael did. Maybe. He didn't sound convinced. But a man who loses everyone he cares about eventually has to consider that he might be the problem. The starkness of this self-assessment stunned her. Is that why you sought a wife from Boston? Someone with no connection to your past, no knowledge of your losses? His eyes met hers, startlingly vulnerable. Partly. Thought it might be easier to start fresh with someone who didn't see me as a failure before we even began. I don't see you as a failure, Jack. She stepped closer, emboldened by the honesty between them. I see a man who has faced more loss than anyone should have to bear, yet still finds the strength to build something worthwhile. He looked away, uncomfortable with her praise. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. I know enough, she insisted. I've seen how you care for this land, how you treat your men fairly, how you've honored every promise in our agreement. Those aren't the actions of a failure. A muscle worked in his jaw. Appreciate the sentiment, but it's not sentiment, she interrupted. It's observation. The past month has given me ample opportunity to assess your character, and while you're certainly stubborn and occasionally infuriatingly reticent, you are not by any measure a failure. The unexpected vehemence of her defense seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, something almost like wonder crossed his features before he mastered it. You're a surprising woman, Eliza Thatcher, he said finally, as you're a surprising man, Jack Thatcher. She held his gaze steadily. Perhaps we could agree to stop protecting each other from the truth and simply share it instead. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Might be easier said than done. Most worthwhile things are, she replied. That evening, after supper, Jack brought out a small wooden chest she had never seen before. He set it on the table between them, his expression solemn. If we're sharing truths, he said, you should know all of it. Inside the chest were letters, photographs, a pocket watch, and a small leather pouch. One by one, Jack removed the items, telling the stories attached to each. His father's struggle to establish the ranch during drought years, his mother's determination to create a proper home in the wilderness, Michael's bright spirit and reckless heart. As the night deepened around them, Eliza came to understand the full measure of what Jack had lost and the courage it had taken to open himself to the possibility of caring again, even in the practical, bounded way he had proposed to her. The first snow came earlier than expected, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that glittered in the morning sun. Eliza stood at the kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands, watching Jack move through the yard with purposeful strides. Even in the heavy sheepskin coat that protected him from the biting cold, the power in his frame was evident, each movement efficient, deliberate, shaped by years of hard work. In the weeks since he had shared his family's history, something had shifted between them. The careful distance remained physically. Jack still slept in the study, still maintained the boundaries they had established. But emotionally, walls had begun to crumble. He sought her company in the evenings, listened to her ideas about improvements to the ranch, even laughed occasionally at her dry observations about their neighbors. For her part, Eliza found herself increasingly drawn to the complexity beneath his stoic exterior. The tenderness he showed toward injured animals, the pride he took in his craftsmanship, the depth of thought revealed in his rare but insightful comments, all painted a picture of a man far more nuanced than the reclusive giant the town perceived. Jack came in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots at the door. "Storm's coming," he announced, hanging his coat on the peg. "Maybe 3 days out. Need to prepare." "What can I do to help?" Eliza asked, passing him a cup of coffee. His hands, always so large, seemed to dwarf the cup as he accepted it. "Make a list of household supplies. Might be snowed in for a week or more once it hits." The gravity in his tone made her study his face more carefully. "Is this unusual?" "First winter storm's always the test," he replied, warming his hands around the cup. "Tells you what you missed in your preparations, what needs reinforcing before the real winter sets in." Over the next 2 days, the ranch became a hive of activity. Jack and Hank moved vulnerable cattle to sheltered pastures, reinforced outbuildings, and stockpiled firewood. Eliza inventoried supplies, prepared storage areas for fresh vegetables from the root cellar, and baked bread to last through the coming days. The morning of the 3rd day dawned ominously still, the air sharp with impending snow. Jack left before sunrise to make a final check of the farthest pastures, promising to return by noon. "Don't worry if I'm a bit late," he told Eliza as he saddled his horse. "Might stop at the Western Line cabin if the weather turns faster than expected." By mid-morning, the first flakes began to fall, delicate at first, then increasingly dense as the wind rose. Eliza found herself checking the window with growing frequency as noon came and went with no sign of Jack. The practical part of her mind knew he was experienced, that he knew this land better than anyone. Yet worry gnawed at her, intensifying as the snowfall thickened into a blinding curtain. At 3 o'clock, with daylight already fading and the storm howling in earnest, Eliza made a decision. She stoked the fires in the main room and kitchen to blazing, filled a lantern with oil, and hung it in the window facing the range. Then she moved to the porch, ringing the large iron bell that was used only for emergencies. Its deep tone carried across the ranch, barely audible above the wind but distinct enough to reach the nearby outbuildings. Minutes later, Hank appeared, snow crusting his hat and shoulders. "Mrs. Thatcher?" His weathered face creased with concern. "Something wrong?" "Jack's not back," she said simply. "He went to check the western pastures this morning." Understanding dawned in Hank's eyes. "Line cabin's out that way. He'd have holed up there when the storm hit." "Unless something prevented him from reaching it," Eliza countered. "He said he'd be back by noon." Hank glanced at the sky, now nearly dark with storm clouds. "Can't send a search party in this, visibility's down to nothing." "Then I'll go myself," Eliza said, her mind already calculating what she would need. "Now hold on," Hank protested. "Jack would have my hide if I let you ride out in this. He knows what he's doing." "I'm not suggesting he doesn't," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But if he's injured or lost, every hour matters in this cold." Hank studied her face, seemingly weighing her determination against his responsibility. "At least let me come with you." "Someone needs to stay here in case he returns," she countered. "I'll follow the western trail. It's straightforward enough, and I'll take the mare. She knows the way better than I do." Reluctantly, Hank helped her prepare. They loaded a pack with blankets, medical supplies, food, and a flask of whiskey. Eliza dressed in layers, borrowing one of Jack's smaller coats that still engulfed her frame but provided essential warmth. "Keep the lantern burning," she instructed as she mounted, "and if we're not back by morning, send word to town." The snow hit her like a physical wall as she rode away from the ranch house. Within minutes, the guiding light of the lantern faded behind her, leaving only the endless white of the storm. Eliza hunched lower in the saddle, trusting the mare to follow the familiar trail while she focused on keeping her bearings. Time lost meaning in the howling whiteness. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as cold seeped through her layers despite the exertion. Twice she nearly turned back, doubt overwhelming her determination. What if Jack had taken a different route? What if she passed him in the blinding snow? Just as despair began to take hold, the mare's ears pricked forward. Ahead, barely visible through the swirling flakes, stood the dark outline of the line cabin. No smoke rose from its chimney. No light shone from its single window. Eliza dismounted with difficulty, her numbed fingers struggling with the reins as she secured the mare to the cabin's porch post. The door was unlocked, but took effort to push open against the snow that had drifted against it. "Jack," she called, stepping into the darkness. No answer came. The cabin was empty, its interior cold and undisturbed. Whatever hope had carried her through the storm faltered. If Jack wasn't here, where could he be? As she turned to leave, movement caught her eye, a dark shape emerging from the white void beyond the cabin. Relief surged through her as she recognized the massive silhouette. "Jack!" she called, rushing back into the storm. He approached slowly, leading his horse, his form bent against the wind. When he saw her, he straightened in apparent shock. "Eliza." His voice was barely audible over the wind. "What in God's name—" "You didn't come back," she said simply, moving to help with his horse. In the dim light, she could see his face was pale beneath his beard, his movements stiff with cold and what appeared to be pain. Once inside the cabin, he sagged against the table, his breathing labored. "You're hurt," she observed, quickly lighting the lantern she had brought. "Horse slipped on ice," he explained, wincing as he removed his coat to reveal a torn sleeve and blood-stained shirt beneath. "Took a fall down the ravine edge, spent hours getting back up." Working efficiently, Eliza built a fire in the small stove, then turned her attention to Jack's injury. The gash on his upper arm was deep but clean, the cold having slowed the bleeding. As she cleaned and bandaged the wound, she was acutely aware of his eyes on her face. "You shouldn't have come," he said finally, his voice rough. "Too dangerous." "You would have done the same for me," she replied, securing the bandage. "That's different." "Is it?" She met his gaze steadily. "You're my husband, Jack. Did you think I would simply wait at home, wondering if you were lying injured or worse?" Something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to a realization that seemed to humble him. "Didn't think anyone would—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Care enough to risk themselves for you," she finished softly. "Then you've underestimated what you mean to me." The words hung between them, more honest than anything she had allowed herself to acknowledge before. Jack's hand, so much larger than hers, reached out to touch her cheek with unexpected gentleness. "Eliza," he said, her name a question and answer both. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the small cabin, something warm and vital had ignited between them. Something that had nothing to do with practical arrangements and everything to do with the recognition of what they had become to each other. The line cabin was little more than a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot against one wall. Built as emergency shelter for ranch hands caught in sudden weather, it offered protection but few comforts. Yet as the night deepened and the storm raged outside, Eliza found an unexpected intimacy in the confined space. Jack sat close to the stove, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face, highlighting the weariness etched there. His injured arm was cradled against his chest, his breathing still labored from pain and exhaustion. "You should rest," Eliza said, arranging blankets on the cot. "The wound isn't severe, but you've lost blood and been in the cold too long." He shook his head. "You take the cot. I'll manage on the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," she countered, her concern overriding deference. "You're injured and half frozen. The cot is barely wide enough for you alone, let alone for me to join you there." Something flickered in his eyes at her words. Surprise, perhaps, or a more complex emotion she couldn't name. "Wouldn't be proper," he said finally. Eliza almost laughed at the incongruity. Here they were, isolated in a blizzard, miles from anyone, and he was concerned with propriety. "I think we're beyond such considerations at the moment, don't you? Our survival matters more than social niceties." She approached him, holding out her hand. "Come. We've ridden through a blizzard and treated a serious wound. Surely we can manage to share a small space for one night without compromising our arrangement." After a moment's hesitation, he accepted her help, wincing as he rose. On the cot, he arranged himself carefully, leaving as much space as possible on the narrow mattress. Eliza extinguished the lantern to conserve oil, leaving only the stove's glow to illuminate the cabin. When she settled beside him, they lay awkwardly, both hyper-aware of each point where their bodies touched, despite the layers of clothing between them. Jack's breathing was controlled, deliberate, as if he were consciously managing each inhalation. "I thought you might be dead," Eliza said softly, the darkness making it easier to voice her fears. "When you didn't return by sunset, I imagined you lying injured somewhere in the snow, slowly freezing." His hand found hers beneath the blankets, large and rough but unexpectedly gentle. "Been surviving these winters long before you arrived, Boston." "That doesn't mean you're invincible," she replied, her fingers curling instinctively around his. "Even the strongest man can fall." He was quiet for a long moment. "Never had anyone worry about me that way before," he admitted finally. "Not since my mother." The simplicity of the statement broke something in Eliza's heart. She thought of all he had lost, parents, brother, fiancé, and how those losses had taught him to expect solitude rather than support. "Well, you have someone now," she said, the words emerging more fiercely than she'd intended. His hand tightened on hers, and in the dim light she could just make out his profile as he turned toward her. "Why did you really come after me, Eliza?" The question hung between them, demanding a level of honesty she hadn't yet admitted even to herself. "Because the thought of losing you was unbearable," she whispered. "Because somehow, in these few months, you've become essential to me." She felt rather than saw his sharp intake of breath. "This wasn't part of our arrangement," he said, his voice roughened with emotion. "Practical partnership, mutual respect. Nothing about feelings." "I know," she acknowledged, "yet here we are." "Here we are," he echoed, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. The cabin creaked around them as the wind battered its walls. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, but within their small shelter, a different kind of tempest was brewing, one made of unspoken desires and newfound vulnerability. "Jack," Eliza began, uncertain how to articulate the shifting landscape between them. "I need to know if I'm alone in this." He turned fully toward her then, his face inches from hers. "You're not alone," he said, the words seeming to cost him enormous effort. "Haven't been since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach looking like you might take on the whole territory single-handed." A small laugh escaped her. "I was terrified." "Couldn't tell," he admitted. "Thought you were the bravest woman I'd ever seen." "And now?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Now I know you are," he replied, his free hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. riding through a blizzard to find a man most would have written off as lost. The touch of his fingers against her cheek sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire or blankets. "Not just any man," she corrected softly. "You." In the dim light, his eyes searched hers, seeking permission for something he couldn't ask aloud. Eliza answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held none of the hesitation of their wedding day. For a moment, Jack remained utterly still, as if frozen by her boldness. Then, with a sound somewhere between a groan and a sigh, he responded, his hand sliding into her hair as he deepened the kiss. The careful restraint he had maintained for months dissolved in an instant, revealing a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since I saw you standing in that schoolhouse," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her hand resting against the solid warmth of his chest, feeling his heart race beneath her palm. "Didn't think I deserved to," he said simply. "Thought you'd agreed to a practical arrangement, not this." This encompassed everything unspoken between them: desire, tenderness, the beginnings of something deeper than either had anticipated when they signed their marriage contract. "I think," Eliza said carefully, "that we've both been hiding behind that arrangement, afraid to admit how much more it's become." Jack's arms tightened around her, mindful of his injury but drawing her closer nonetheless. "Never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted. "After Sarah left, closed that part of myself off. Easier that way." "And now?" Eliza asked, echoing her earlier question. His hand cradled her face with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Now I'm terrified," he said honestly, "because having something to lose again means risking the kind of pain I'm not sure I could survive twice." The vulnerability in his admission moved her deeply. This powerful man who could break a wild horse or fight a prairie fire without flinching was afraid, not of physical danger, but of the emotional devastation love could bring. "I can't promise we won't hurt each other," Eliza said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But I can promise I won't run at the first sign of difficulty. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, just as we've faced everything else since I arrived." Outside, the storm continued its assault, snow piling against the cabin's walls, wind howling through the eaves. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Jack and Eliza found a different kind of shelter, one built not of logs and mortar, but of newfound trust and awakening love. Morning brought pale sunlight filtering through frosted windows, and a profound change in the atmosphere between them. The awkwardness that had characterized their early interactions was gone, replaced by an easy intimacy that manifested in small ways. Jack's hand lingering at her waist as they prepared to leave, Eliza's fingers brushing his as she checked his bandage one last time. The journey back to the ranch was slow but peaceful, the world transformed by the storm into a glistening expanse of white. Jack rode beside Eliza rather than ahead, his eyes frequently finding hers with a warmth that made the bitter cold seem distant and unimportant. Hank was waiting anxiously, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile when he spotted them cresting the hill. "Thank the Lord," he called, hurrying to meet them. Was about to gather a search party from town. "We found shelter at the line cabin," Eliza explained as Jack dismounted stiffly, his injury clearly paining him despite his attempts to hide it. Hank's shrewd eyes took in their changed demeanor, the way Jack helped Eliza down from her horse with lingering hands, the quiet intimacy in their exchanged glances. A knowing smile crossed his face, but he said nothing, simply helping with the horses while Eliza guided Jack inside. The following days brought another kind of storm, an internal one as they navigated the transformation of their relationship. The careful distance Jack had maintained dissolved, replaced by tentative touches, shared smiles, and conversations that stretched late into the evening. He moved his belongings from the study to the main bedroom, though Eliza noticed how he seemed to hold his breath the first time he crossed that threshold, as if expecting rejection, despite her clear invitation. "You don't have to," she assured him, recognizing his hesitation. "We can take this slowly." Jack's eyes met hers, vulnerability mingling with determination in their blue depths. "Been taking it slowly for months," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't want to waste any more time pretending I don't want to be with my wife." The word wife carried new meaning now, not just a practical title defined by their contract, but an acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. That night, as snow fell gently outside their window, they discovered each other with reverent hands and whispered confessions. Jack's touch was both powerful and achingly gentle, his massive body sheltering rather than overwhelming her smaller frame. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Eliza felt him trembling slightly against her. "Jack," she whispered, concerned. "Never thought I'd have this again," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Someone to hold, someone who sees me as I am and stays anyway." She pressed closer, her hand over his heart. "I'm not going anywhere." As winter settled fully over the ranch, they fell into new rhythms. Jack still rose before dawn, still worked from sunup to sundown, but now he sought her out throughout the day, stopping by the house for coffee, bringing her small treasures from his rides across the property, consulting her about decisions that once he would have made alone. For her part, Eliza found herself becoming more fully integrated into ranch operations. She took over the account books, discovering a talent for management that complemented Jack's practical knowledge. She learned to identify signs of weather changes, to predict which cattle might need extra attention, to recognize when Jack was pushing himself too hard and needed rest. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss, the occasional smiles, the reduced tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes followed Eliza whenever she was near. Once taciturn, he now joined conversations at mealtimes, even laughed at Hank's well-worn jokes. "Never seen him like this," Hank confided to Eliza one afternoon as they watched Jack instruct a young ranch hand in the repair of a fence. "Not even before Sarah. There's a piece to him now." "He deserves it," Eliza said simply, "after everything he's been through." Hank nodded thoughtfully. Known Jack since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Watched him shoulder burdens that would have broken most men. Always figured he'd carry them alone to the grave. His eyes crinkled as he smiled at her. "Then you stepped off that stagecoach." The words warmed her, but also awakened a lingering uncertainty that occasionally troubled her quiet moments. Had she truly been Jack's choice, or merely the most suitable of limited options? Would he have chosen her if circumstances had been different, if his heart hadn't been scarred by loss and betrayal? These questions remained unspoken, buried beneath the growing contentment of their shared life, until 3 months after the blizzard a letter arrived from Boston. Eliza recognized the handwriting immediately. Thomas Sullivan, the man who had left her waiting at the church 3 years earlier. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, wondering what possible reason he could have for contacting her after so long. The contents were both shocking and infuriatingly predictable. Thomas's advantageous marriage had collapsed, his wife discovering his numerous infidelities and leaving him. Now, conveniently remembering Eliza's existence, he wrote of regret and second chances, of his intention to travel west in the spring to make amends and reclaim what we once had. She was still staring at the letter, anger and disbelief warring within her, when Jack returned from checking the northern pastures. He found her in the kitchen, the pages spread before her on the table. "Eliza?" he asked, concern sharpening his voice at her expression. What's happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His face darkened as he read, jaw tightening beneath his beard, the muscle in his cheek working as it did when he was controlling strong emotion. "Thomas Sullivan," he said finally, setting the pages down with careful precision. "The man who left you at the altar." "Yes." She watched his face, trying to read the emotions behind his controlled expression. "He's coming here, in the spring." Jack's voice was carefully neutral, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "So he claims," Eliza replied, "though I have no intention of seeing him." Jack's eyes finally met hers, and the vulnerability there caught at her heart. "Don't you?" he asked quietly. The question stunned her. "Why would I?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the window. "He was your choice," he said finally. "The man you wanted to marry before life forced other plans on you." Understanding dawned. Despite everything they had shared, despite the love that had grown between them, Jack still carried the wounds of his past, still believed on some level that he was second choice, a practical alternative rather than a desired partner. Eliza rose from her chair and moved to stand before him, her hands reaching up to frame his face, forcing him to look at her. Thomas Sullivan was a boy who wanted a proper Boston wife to complete his social standing, she said firmly. When a better opportunity arose, he discarded me without hesitation. I came west not because life forced me, but because I chose a new path, one that led me to you. His hands came up to cover hers, large and warm against her skin. And if he had been faithful, if you had married him as planned, then I would never have known what it means to be truly seen and valued, she answered without hesitation. I would never have experienced the kind of partnership we've built. I would never have fallen in love with a man who reads poetry by firelight and builds furniture with his hands and treats me as an equal rather than an ornament. Jack's breath caught at her words, the first time either of them had spoken of love directly. "Eliza," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want Thomas Sullivan," she interrupted, needing him to understand completely. "I don't want Boston or the life I left behind. I want you, Jack Thatcher. Not because you were the only option, but because you are the only man I could imagine building a life with now that I know what that truly means." Something broke in his expression then, the last remnant of doubt yielding to hope. He gathered her against him, his arms encircling her with a tenderness that belied their strength. "I love you," he said, the words emerging as if drawn from the depths of him. "Have for months now, maybe since that day you stood up to Catherine Harrington without flinching." Eliza smiled against his chest, remembering. "It was your laugh that did it for me," she admitted. "That first real laugh in the wagon made me wonder what you'd look like if you were truly happy." His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, his touch reverent. "And now?" She looked up at him, at the face that had become dearer to her than any other. "Now I know, and it's more beautiful than I could have imagined." Spring came to Montana with surprising gentleness that year. Snow melted gradually, rather than in the destructive floods Jack had feared, revealing tender green shoots beneath. The ranch awakened from its winter slumber, cattle returning to higher pastures, fields being prepared for planting, fruit trees in the small orchard Eliza had insisted on expanding, bursting into fragrant bloom. With the changing season came preparations of a different sort. True to his word, Thomas Sullivan had written again, confirming his intention to visit Timber Creek in late April. Though Eliza had responded with a firmly worded letter declining any meeting, Jack noticed how the approaching date weighed on her, bringing moments of distraction and tension that interrupted their hard-won happiness. "He won't change anything between us," she assured Jack one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Jack's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I know," he said, though Eliza heard the faintest thread of uncertainty beneath his confidence. "But you're still worried," she observed, looking up at his profile, strong and steadfast against the fading light. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "Not about your feelings," he clarified. "About having to face a man who hurt you. About controlling myself when I do." The protective instinct in his words warmed her. "I don't need you to defend my honor, Jack. That battle is long past." "Doesn't mean I don't want to," he admitted with a slight smile. "Been thinking of all the things I'd like to say to him since that first letter arrived." Eliza leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Just remember that if he hadn't been such a spineless coward, I might never have come west, never have found you." His kiss was gentle against her hair. "Then I suppose I should thank him instead." When the stagecoach arrived 2 weeks later, Eliza was in town for the ladies' auxiliary meeting. The monthly gathering had become important to her, a chance to maintain connections beyond the ranch and contribute to the community's growing cultural life. The proposed library was taking shape, with Mrs. Wilson having secured space in the back of the church and Eliza organizing the cataloging system. She was discussing potential fundraising events with the other women when the coach rumbled down the main street, drawing attention as it always did in their small town. The door opened and a well-dressed man stepped down, brushing dust from his expensive coat with fastidious care. Eliza recognized him immediately, though 3 years had changed him. Thomas Sullivan's once boyish face had hardened, lines of discontent etched around his mouth. His hair was thinning at the temples, and he carried himself with the forced confidence of a man accustomed to masking insecurity with arrogance. "Isn't that," Mrs. Peterson began, having heard Eliza's story months ago. "Yes," Eliza replied calmly, "though I can't imagine what he hopes to accomplish here." She continued sorting books, determined not to give Thomas the satisfaction of disrupting her day. When the door to the church hall opened minutes later, however, she knew her hope for avoiding a confrontation had been naive. "Eliza," Thomas called, his voice carrying the refined Boston accent that had once seemed so sophisticated to her. "My dear, at last I've found you." The room fell silent as every woman turned to stare. Eliza rose slowly, straightening her shoulders as she faced the man who had once broken her heart. "Mr. Sullivan," she said coolly, "I believe my letter made it clear that I had no desire to meet with you." He stepped forward, either ignoring or oblivious to the hostility emanating from the gathered women. "You can't have meant that," he said, his tone condescending. "Not after everything we meant to each other." "I meant exactly what I wrote," Eliza replied. "Our connection ended 3 years ago by your choice. I've built a new life here." Thomas glanced around the simple church hall with poorly disguised disdain. "This frontier existence? Surely you can't prefer this to what we had in Boston, what we could have again." Before Eliza could respond, the door opened once more. Jack filled the frame, his massive shoulders blocking the light, his expression carefully controlled as he surveyed the scene. Thomas turned at the interruption, his eyes widening slightly as he took in Jack's imposing figure. "Excuse me," Thomas said dismissively. "This is a private conversation." "With my wife," Jack replied, his voice deceptively calm. "Makes it my business." Thomas blinked, surprise giving way to disbelief as his gaze darted between them. "Wife? You can't be serious, Eliza. This mountain man?" Eliza moved to stand beside Jack, her hand finding his. "My husband, Jack Thatcher, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the county, respected community member, and the finest man I have ever known." The women of the auxiliary watched with undisguised interest, several nodding in approval at her words. Mrs. Wilson even gave a small, satisfied from her seat by the book table. Thomas seemed genuinely bewildered, as if the possibility that Eliza might prefer another life, another man, had never occurred to him. But your family in Boston, your position in society, mean far less to me than what I've found here, Eliza interrupted. I'm sorry you've wasted your journey, Thomas, but there's nothing for you in Timber Creek. Jack remained silent beside her, his presence supportive without being overbearing. Eliza felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Another man might have intervened, might have tried to speak for her or assert his claim. Jack simply stood with her, trusting her to handle the situation herself. Thomas's face flushed with wounded pride. I see I've been misled about your circumstances, he said stiffly. Though I can't imagine how this primitive existence could possibly satisfy a woman of your background and education. Jack shifted slightly, and Eliza felt the tension in his frame. She squeezed his hand reassuringly before addressing Thomas one last time. That's because you never truly knew me, Thomas. What satisfied me was never important to you. She softened her tone slightly. I wish you well, but my life is here now. It would be best if you took the next coach back east. For a moment, Thomas looked as if he might argue further. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. The room erupted in excited whispers as soon as he was gone. Mrs. Peterson approached, her eyes twinkling. Well, that was better than any play I've ever seen in Helena, she declared, though I'm a bit disappointed Jack didn't punch him just a little. Jack's mouth twitched with suppressed humor. Considered it, he admitted, but figured Eliza had matters well in hand. Indeed she did, Mrs. Wilson agreed. Now, shall we continue with our library plans? I believe we were discussing a fundraising social. The matter-of-fact return to business made Eliza laugh, tension dissipating as quickly as it had gathered. By the time they left town that afternoon, Thomas Sullivan was already aboard the eastbound coach, his brief intrusion into their lives becoming nothing more than an anecdote to be shared on winter evenings. As they rode home, the ranch spreading before them in spring splendor, Jack broke their companionable silence. Meant what you said back there? About me being the finest man you've known? Eliza smiled at the hint of wonder in his voice, the lingering disbelief that she had chosen him so definitively. Every word, she assured him. Though I might have mentioned a few other qualities if we hadn't been in mixed company. His surprised laugh echoed across the valley, full and unreserved in a way that still delighted her. When they reached the house, he lifted her from the saddle with ease, holding her close rather than setting her immediately on her feet. 7 years, he said thoughtfully, his eyes finding hers. That's how long I went without touching a woman, without letting anyone close enough to matter. Thought that part of my life was over forever. Eliza reached up to trace the lines of his face, fingers gentle against his beard. And now? Now I can't imagine a day without touching you, he admitted. Without seeing your face first thing in the morning and last thing at night, without knowing you're here, making this house a home, making this life worth every hardship that came before. As the setting sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here, from abandoned bride to mail-order wife, from practical arrangement to profound love. The reclusive rancher who had greeted her that first day with gruff caution had transformed through their shared months into a man who could speak his heart openly, who had rediscovered joy and connection after years of isolation. I'm with child, she said suddenly, the secret she had carried for weeks finally finding voice. Due in the fall, according to Dr. Wilson. Jack stared at her in stunned silence, his hands tightening instinctively at her waist. A baby? He whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make the news dissolve like morning mist. Our baby? Eliza nodded, tears of joy blurring her vision at the wonder spreading across his face. Our baby, she confirmed. The start of our family. He gathered her close, his powerful body trembling with emotion. Thank you, he murmured against her hair, for answering my letter, for taking a chance on a stranger, for seeing something worth loving in a man most had written off. I should be thanking you, she replied, for offering me not just security or respectability, but the chance to build something real, something lasting. As twilight settled over the Montana wilderness, the reclusive rancher and his mail-order bride stood embraced in the yard of the home they had created together. Behind them lay a path of loss and loneliness, practical arrangements and careful boundaries. Before them stretched a future neither could have imagined when they signed their marriage contract, one filled with the promise of family, of deep connection, of a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something strong enough to weather any storm.